Greg, this is the last time you'll open our home to strangers without asking me. I dropped my bag on the kitchen counter, eyes blazing at the scene before me. Come on, it's just Rob. He's like a brother. Greg looked up from his beer, a lazy grin plastered on his face. You know how my day was. I just wanted peace tonight. My tone wasn't just firm, it was a warning. Rob leaned back on the couch, clearly sensing the tension, but choosing to stay silent. He sipped on his beer, eyes flicking between Greg and me. It's not a big deal, Meredith. It's not like I threw a party, Greg chuckled. No, I said, crossing my arms, but it's the principle, respecting each other's space. Greg sighed, standing up and walking over to the fridge. He grabbed another beer, deliberately ignoring my feelings. My blood boiled hotter. This isn't the first time, Greg. I ran my hand through my hair, trying to control my anger. I was really looking forward to my show tonight. Greg popped open the beer, avoiding eye contact. You can still watch it. I looked at the clock, knowing the episode had already started. And how am I supposed to focus with you two laughing and chatting? Greg still didn't get it. Or maybe he didn't want to. Rob's here for one night. Chill out. Rob, sensing a storm brewing, finally spoke. Maybe I should leave. No, Rob, I said sharply, not taking my eyes off Greg. You're here now. Let's just get through it. Greg shrugged and took a lazy swig of his beer. See? No harm done. I seethed as I walked past them, heading to the bedroom. I couldn't deal with this again. It wasn't about Rob or anyone specific. It was about respect, something Greg seemed to lack when it came to our shared space. I closed the door behind me and sunk onto the bed. Turning on the TV, the familiar intro to my true crime show filled the room, but my mind was elsewhere. Greg's disregard wasn't new. This pattern had been going on for months. 10 minutes into the episode, Greg knocked on the door and entered before I could respond. Meredith, seriously? Let's not fight over this. I muted the TV, frustration boiling over. Greg, it's not about Rob. It's about you not taking my feelings seriously. Can't you see that? He gave a bad imitation of a remorseful look and sat down next to me. I guess I didn't think it was that big of a deal. You didn't think, I repeated, voice trembling not with sadness but with sheer anger. That's the whole problem. This is our home. You can't just invite people over without asking. Greg stayed silent. I continued, not letting him off the hook. I need you to understand how much this matters to me. He finally met my eyes, a flicker of realization but also resistance. All right, I get it. I'll ask next time. The way he said it, I wasn't convinced. It felt like a placation, a way to end the argument for now. Promise me, I demanded. Promise you'll respect our space. Yeah, he nodded, but the nonchalance in his eyes worried me. Sure. I watched him leave the room, the door closing with a quiet click. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, knowing this issue was far from over. It was about more than just friends and unexpected visits. It was about respect, and that was something Greg seemed to have a hard time grasping. As the muted TV flickered shadows on the walls, I realized the real struggle had just begun. The next morning, I woke up early, the weight of yesterday still heavy on my mind. Greg was snoring lightly next to me, oblivious to the turmoil he had caused. I didn't want to start the day with more arguments, but I knew that we needed to have a real conversation about last night. I got dressed and went downstairs, choosing to wait for Greg to wake up. I busied myself with making coffee, the aroma filling the kitchen and providing some comfort. About an hour later, Greg finally stumbled into the kitchen, scratching his head and yawning. "Morning," he mumbled. I didn't respond immediately, focusing instead on pouring coffee into 2 mugs. Finally, I turned to him. "We need to talk." Greg looked at me with a hint of annoyance. "About what? Rob's gone now. Can't we just let it go?" "No, Greg, we can't just let it go." I handed him a mug, my eyes hard. "You keep inviting people over without asking me. Last night was just another example of you not respecting my space." He sighed dramatically. "You're blowing this out of proportion, Meredith." "Am I?" I challenged, setting my mug down with a thud. "Every time this happens, you brush it off like it's nothing. But it's not nothing to me. What do you want me to do? Start sending you calendar invites?" Greg scoffed. "I want you to think about me before making decisions that affect both of us." "Is that too much to ask?" Greg rolled his eyes. "You know what your problem is? You're too rigid. You need to relax. Life isn't just about schedules and rules." I felt my fists clench. You're missing the point. This is about respect, Greg. Respect for our home and for each other. I'm not asking for much. He took a sip of his coffee, avoiding my eyes. I'll try to remember next time, all right? Can we drop it now? I didn't believe him. His dismissive tone told me all I needed to know. This isn't the first time this has happened, Greg. It's becoming a pattern, and it's not just about last night. There have been plenty of other times. I paused, expecting him to argue, but he stayed silent. Emboldened, I continued, every time you do this, it makes me feel like you don't care about my needs, like I'm invisible. Greg finally looked up, irritation clear on his face. Are you seriously going to make this into a big deal? It was one night, Meredith. I shook my head, tears of frustration welling up. That's exactly it. You always think it's just one night, one small thing, but those small things keep piling up. He set his mug down more forcefully than necessary. Fine, from now on, I'll ask. Happy? No, because I don't believe you mean it, I replied, voice trembling but firm. I need you to understand that this is serious. If you keep ignoring my feelings, this won't work. Greg stared at me, seemingly taken aback by my ultimatum. You're really serious, aren't you? Yes, Greg. I am. I turned away, needing to get some distance. Think about what I've said. As I walked out of the kitchen, I knew that this wasn't the end of our argument, but at least I had made it clear that things needed to change. I came home from work later that week, hoping for a quiet evening, but the sound of laughter hit me as soon as I opened the door. Greg was sitting in the living room with two of his friends, beers on the coffee table, the TV blaring. Hey, you're home, Greg said, barely looking up. I forced a smile, trying to hide my frustration. I see we have more guests. One of his friends, Kevin, nodded at me. Hey, Meredith. Greg said it was cool to come over. I gritted my teeth, shooting a look at Greg. Can I talk to you in the kitchen for a second? Greg sighed but followed me. Once we were out of earshot, I turned to him. What did we just talk about last week? He shrugged, clearly annoyed. What now? I asked you to inform me before inviting people over. You promised, Greg. I forgot. It's not a big deal, he said, crossing his arms defensively. It is a big deal to me, I said, my voice rising. You keep ignoring my feelings. It's like you don't even care. He rolled his eyes. You're overreacting, Meredith. We're just hanging out. No, I'm not overreacting. You keep doing this, and it's disrespectful. I need peace when I come home. Greg leaned against the counter, shaking his head. You're acting like a control freak. Lighten up. I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. This isn't about control. It's about respect. This is our home. Both of us need a say. Whatever, he muttered, already walking back to his friends. I stood there, feeling the sting of his words. This wasn't going anywhere. I knew then that Greg had no intention of changing. The realization settled heavily in my chest. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, while the muffled sounds of their laughter and chatter seeped through the walls. It was hopeless. Greg didn't care about my needs or the impact of his actions on our relationship. As the night dragged on, my resolve hardened. If he wouldn't respect our space, I would make sure to reclaim it myself. The following morning, Greg was already up and about, seemingly oblivious to the argument from the night before. I found him in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone. We need to talk, I said, stepping in. Again? Greg sighed, not even looking up. Yes, again. Because things haven't changed. You keep dismissing me, Greg, and it's not okay. He finally looked up, irritation evident. What do you want from me, Meredith? I said I'd try to remember. Can you just drop it? No, I can't just drop it. If you can't respect this one simple request, what else won't you respect? Greg threw his hands up. Fine. You want respect? Respect works both ways. Stop nagging me about every little thing. I took a step back, hurt by his outburst. I'm not nagging. I'm asking for basic consideration. Greg scoffed. You know what? Maybe you're too sensitive. Maybe that's the problem. I felt a lump in my throat, but pushed it down. Maybe, but that doesn't excuse your behavior. He stared at me, unyielding. I'll do better. This conversation is over. But as he stormed out, I knew it wasn't. This was far from over. Respect wasn't something you demanded. It was earned. And if Greg couldn't see that, then I needed to take steps to protect myself and my peace. There was no turning back now. Greg had shown his true colors, and it was time for me to act. The days moved forward in an uncomfortable truce. Greg seemed more irritable, his attitude flaring up without warning. I, on the other hand, sank deeper into planning. The next incident had to be handled decisively. One evening after work, I decided to put my foot down. "Greg, we need to talk," I said as he lounged on the couch, aimlessly flipping through channels. He huffed, but muted the TV. "What is it this time?" I sat down across from him, eyes unwavering. "No more uninvited guests without informing me first." Greg smirked, a mischievous glint in his eyes. Sure. I'll send out a notification next time," he joked. I leaned forward, seriousness radiating from me. "I mean it, Greg, this is non-negotiable. We are in this together. Respect my wishes or we will have a serious problem." He gave a nonchalant shrug. "Fine, no more surprises. Happy now? You promise?" I pressed. Yeah, I promise," he said, waving me off. The following week, the atmosphere felt lighter initially. Maybe, just maybe, he'd finally understood. But deep down, I remained skeptical. Friday came, and as soon as I walked through the door, the sound of loud music and laughter greeted me. My heart sank. "Greg!" I shouted over the noise. He sauntered over, a drink in his hand, smiling like he owned the place. "Hey, babe, welcome home. Great timing." I glared at him, fury building. "What is this, Greg? We talked about this." "It's just a small get-together," he said, as if it explained everything. Don't be such a buzzkill." "Small get-together? There are at least 10 people here. This isn't what we agreed on," I said, my voice trembling with anger. Greg took a sip of his drink, unbothered. "Relax, Meredith. It's the weekend. Just have a drink and join us." I shook my head, feeling the last straw break. "This is it, Greg. I can't take this anymore." He laughed, his tone mocking. Don't be dramatic. It's just a party." I turned on my heel and stormed out, heading straight to our bedroom. As the door shut behind me, I picked up my phone and called the divorce lawyer I had researched weeks before. It was time to take action. Over the next few days, I began to quietly prepare. I gathered documents, bank statements, anything that might be useful. I stayed out of Greg's way, avoiding unnecessary confrontation. But the tension was palpable. One evening, Greg confronted me. "You've been weirdly quiet lately. What's going on?" I looked at him dispassionately. "Just thinking about a lot of things." "Are you still upset about the party?" "Meredith, you really need to let it go." "I can't, Greg. It's not just the party. It's everything. This isn't working anymore." He frowned, confusion turning into anger. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I need respect, and you're clearly incapable of giving it. I'm done." Greg laughed, though it was hollow and uneasy. "You're bluffing." I faced him, resolute. "No, I'm not. I spoke to a lawyer." The color drained from his face. "A lawyer? Are you insane?" "No, just tired. Tired of not being heard, of not being respected. This isn't a game, Greg. It's my life, and I'm taking it back." Greg's expression turned dark. "You'll regret this, Meredith." But as I walked away, the only thing I felt was an overwhelming sense of clarity. There was no turning back. My next steps were firmly in place. Coming home one evening, I hoped for quiet. Instead, I walked into chaos. Music blared, voices echoed, the unmistakable signs of another party. My stomach clenched, anger rising. I pushed through the mess of shoes and coats littering the hallway. "Greg!" I called out. No response. I found him in the living room, surrounded by friends, drink in hand, the party in full swing. He looked up and saw me, a slow smirk spreading across his face. "Meredith, join us. Why don't you?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Greg, we need to talk." "Now." Ignoring my tone, he laughed. "Everyone, meet the boss of the house," he said, clearly amused at his own joke. People glanced at me, some sympathetic, others just curious. I felt a mix of embarrassment and fury. "Greg, now." He shrugged, setting his drink down and following me into the kitchen. As soon as the door closed behind us, I turned to him, eyes blazing. "What is this? We talked about this. No more parties." He leaned against the counter, unbothered. "You're being dramatic. It's just a few friends." "No, Greg. This is disrespectful, and you keep doing it." I could feel my hands shaking. Greg's expression turned cold. "You're blowing this way out of proportion. It's just one night." "One night?" I scoffed. "This is the 3rd time this month. I've had enough." "You need to chill, Meredith," he replied, dismissive. "Life can't be all rules and schedules." "I can't live like this, Greg. I've already spoken to a lawyer," I said, my voice firm. His face twisted in surprise, then anger. "A lawyer? For what? This?" "Yes, Greg, this," I said, gesturing around. "It's clear you don't care about my feelings. You promised to respect our home, and you broke that promise. He took a step closer, sneering. You're really going to throw away our marriage over a couple of parties? Yes, I am. Because it's not just the parties. It's the constant disrespect, the disregard for my feelings. I'm done. He looked at me, eyes narrowing. You think you can just walk away? Good luck, Meredith. You'll regret this. I didn't flinch. Maybe, but it can't be worse than this. Without another word, I walked past him, grabbed my phone, and went to the bedroom. My hands were shaking as I called the lawyer again, setting up a meeting to finalize the papers. I couldn't keep doing this. Later that night, after everyone left, Greg stumbled into the bedroom. So that's it? We're done? He slurred, clearly drunk. Yes, Greg. We're done, I said, not looking up from packing a small bag. I'm leaving tonight. He grabbed my arm, making me look at him. You won't survive without me. I pulled my arm free. Watch me. Leaving the house felt surreal, like stepping out of a nightmare. As I drove away, the weight on my chest started to lift. This was just the beginning, but it was my beginning. There was no going back. My next chapter started now. I woke up early, the sun barely breaking through the curtains. The divorce papers lay on the nightstand, staring at me like a challenge waiting to be met. Today was the day. I took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of resolve and anxiety. By the time Greg woke up and stumbled into the kitchen, I was ready. I placed the papers on the table, my heart pounding. Good morning, Greg groaned, not yet noticing the documents. Morning, I replied, my voice calm. We need to talk. He finally saw the papers and froze. What's this? Divorce papers, I said with finality. I'm serious, Greg. You need to sign them. His eyes widened with a mix of shock and anger. You're really doing this? Yes, I am, I said. You had every chance to change. I need respect and peace, and you can't give me that. He grabbed the papers and waved them at me. This is insane. You're throwing away everything over a few arguments? It's not just a few arguments, Greg. It's about trust, respect, all the things you seem to lack. He slapped the papers back on the table. You'll regret this, Meredith. You think you won, but you haven't. I held my ground, my voice steady. This isn't about winning or losing. It's about my peace and my future. He stared at me for a long moment before finally slumping into a chair. Fine. You want your precious respect? Here, he said, grabbing a pen and scrawling his signature angrily. Take it. A wave of relief washed over me, but I remained composed. Thank you. As he handed the papers back, his eyes darkened. Don't think for a second that this is over. You'll see. The threat hung in the air, but I didn't flinch. Goodbye, Greg, I said, turning away and heading out the door. The fresh air hitting my face felt liberating. The next few days flew by. I moved into a small, cozy apartment across town. It was a fresh start, a new beginning that I desperately needed. I dedicated myself to my work, pouring my energy into something constructive. My colleagues noticed the shift, offering support and encouragement. During a quiet evening, as I was organizing my thoughts, my phone rang. It was Dorothy, Greg's mother. Meredith, we need to talk, she said, her voice firm. Of course, Dorothy. What's going on? Come over to the house. We need to discuss this in person. I drove over, nervous but determined. Dorothy greeted me at the door, her expression serious. I heard about the divorce, she said as we sat down in the living room. Yes, it was a difficult decision, but necessary. She nodded, her gaze piercing. I need you to know something about Greg. His father. He had similar issues. I never intervened, thinking he would change, but he never did. I was stunned, but I listened intently. Greg has been irresponsible and manipulative, even with money. He's accrued debts in your name and drained the joint account. My stomach clenched. How could he do this? Dorothy sighed, eyes filled with regret. I thought he'd grow out of it. Apparently, I was wrong. I felt a mix of anger and betrayal. What do I do now? Dorothy reached out, taking my hand. I stand with you on this. We need to set things right. I'll help in any way I can. Her support was a lifeline. Together, we devised a plan to confront Greg and hold him accountable. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life and ensuring such deceit wouldn't go unpunished. As I drove back to my apartment later that night, a sense of determination settled over me. Greg wasn't going to get away with this. The fight was far from over, but I wasn't alone anymore. I stood outside Greg's apartment, my heart pounding with a mix of anxiety and determination. Dorothy's words echoed in my mind, stealing my resolve. Today was the day I confronted Greg with the financial deceit he'd been hiding. I knocked firmly. A moment later, the door swung open. Greg, looking disheveled, stared at me in surprise. "Meredith? What the hell are you doing here?" "We need to talk," I said, pushing past him and into the apartment. Dorothy followed, her presence a silent support. Greg closed the door, clearly annoyed. "What's this about?" "I found out about the debts, Greg. The ones you racked up in my name," I said bluntly, eyes locked on his. His face went pale, but then he laughed, a nervous, mocking sound. "Oh, come on. You're overreacting. They're just a few charges." Dorothy stepped forward, her expression stern. "Don't lie, Greg. We have the evidence." Greg's eyes flickered with anger. "So what? You're here to gang up on me? Make me the bad guy?" "You are the bad guy," I said, keeping my voice level. "You betrayed my trust, and now you need to own up to it." He sneered, crossing his arms. "And if I don't, then we'll take legal action." "Fraud is a serious crime, Greg," Dorothy said, her tone unyielding. Greg's defiance wavered. He looked between us, his bravado starting to crack. "Fine. What do you want?" "Repay every cent you took from the joint account. Clear all debts in my name," I demanded. "And I want it in writing," he scoffed. "You think I have that kind of money just lying around?" Dorothy stepped closer, eyes blazing. "Then sell your assets, figure it out. You created this mess, you will fix it." Greg's face contorted with frustration and fear. "You're ruining my life, Meredith." "No, Greg," I said quietly. "You ruined mine. I'm just taking it back." He glared at me, then at Dorothy. "You both can't do this." Dorothy's voice was calm but firm. "We already have. I've spoken to a lawyer too. If you don't comply, they'll take it from here." Greg's shoulders slumped. He looked defeated, a shadow of the man who had once thought he had all the power. "Fine. I'll do it. Anything to get you off my back." "Good," I said, relief washing over me. "I'll have the paperwork ready by the end of the week. Sign it, and we'll be done." We turned to leave, but Greg called out, "Meredith, wait." I paused, not looking back. "What is it, Greg?" "I'm sorry," he said, his voice softer, though still tinged with bitterness. I turned around, meeting his eyes. "Too late for that, Greg. Actions have consequences. I hope you learn from this." Dorothy and I walked out, the weight of confrontation lifting slightly. As we reached my car, she turned to me, her expression softening. "You did well in there." "Thanks to you," I said, gratitude filling my voice. "I couldn't have done it alone." She nodded. "Now focus on your future. Don't let him drag you down again." Driving away, I felt an unfamiliar sense of peace. The battle was far from over, but I had allies. Greg's manipulations had come to light, and I was taking control of my life. A sense of empowerment surged within me. This was just the beginning of my journey towards reclaiming my happiness. Moving out of Greg's shadow felt like stepping into the sunlight after years in the dark. I settled into my new apartment, finding comfort in the quiet simplicity of my own space. There were no more unexpected parties, no more shouting matches, just peace. One evening, as I was settling into my new home routine, my phone rang. It was my lawyer, Sarah. "Meredith, I have some good news," she said, her voice calm but decisive. "We've settled the financial issues with Greg. He's agreed to repay everything." A wave of relief washed over me. "Thank you, Sarah. This means so much." "Of course," she replied. "We'll make sure he complies with the agreement. Don't worry about a thing." Hanging up, a deep sense of completion settled over me. But I knew that Greg wouldn't make it easy. A few weeks later, I received a call from an unknown number. Picking up, I was greeted by Greg's voice, strained and desperate. "Meredith, please, can we talk?" he pleaded. "What is it, Greg?" I kept my tone flat, emotions in check. "I'm struggling. I don't know how to deal with all this, selling the house, repaying debts. It's too much," he said, voice cracking slightly. "That's the consequence of your actions, Greg. You brought this upon yourself," I replied, feeling a pang of pity but quickly pushing it aside. "Can we at least meet up, just to talk things over?" he asked, desperation clear in his tone. "No, Greg, we're done. The papers are signed, and the agreement is in place. I have nothing more to say to you," I said firmly. "You can't be this cold, Meredith. I need help," he tried again. "I helped you for too long, Greg. Now you have to help yourself," I said, hanging up before he could respond. I knew his plea was another attempt to manipulate me, to drag me back into his web of chaos, but I was beyond that now. My focus was on healing, rebuilding, and moving forward. Dorothy visited me a few days later, bringing over a housewarming gift. "How's the new place?" she asked, looking around. "It's perfect. Peaceful," I said, smiling genuinely. "I'm glad to hear that," she said, sighing. "Greg called me too. He's struggling." "I know," I replied. "He called me asking for help." She shook her head. "He needs to learn responsibility. This is the only way." "I agree," I said. "Thank you for your support, Dorothy. I couldn't have done this without you." She smiled, taking my hand. "You're strong, Meredith. Don't ever doubt that." As days turned into weeks, Greg's situation worsened. Forced to sell assets to pay back the debts, his life of reckless abandon came crashing down. I watched from a distance, detached, as he scrambled to pick up the pieces. In contrast, my life took a turn for the better. Work became my sanctuary, a place where I could channel my energy into something productive. My colleagues noticed the change, often complimenting my renewed focus and determination. One day, Sarah called again with the final update. "Greg has completed the payments. Everything's settled now." "Thank you, Sarah," I said, feeling truly free for the first time in years. After the call, I took a moment to reflect. Greg was a chapter of my life that had closed. Now it was time to write new ones, filled with peace, respect, and self-love. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over my new apartment, I felt a profound sense of liberation. The darkness of the past was behind me, and the future was bright with possibilities. Greg might still reach out, but his calls would go unanswered. I had reclaimed my life, and it was mine to cherish.